the deal that appears to be on the table, based on the pledges that all the countries have made, appears to amount to maybe a cap of temperature rise near 3 degrees Celsius rather than 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, which many people are talking about is what is necessary to save many countries around the world. Is it better to get that sort of deal? I believe Obama in his speech said it's time to make this deal and keep taking steps forward from here on. Do you agree, or is it better for the developing countries, the small island states, the least developed countries in Africa, to simply walk away from the table? And if so, what happens then?
He did also, sorry to just interrupt, Obama did say a couple of times, this is on the brink, they were his words, and that, is it better to hang together or break up? He was talking the language of a possible breakdown.
Well, in the developing countries, such as the island nations in Africa, they're on the brink. They're on the brink of survival. And so what the political agreement that's being negotiated right now essentially ignores their demands. And so if I'm a developing country that is fighting for my survival, both my economic survival, my financial survival, the survival of my people, I'm looking at this deal and I was seriously concerned walking away from it, because it then locks them into a negotiating path that has taken 1.5 degrees Celsius off the table at 350 parts per million. It has begun to lock in the $100 billion in financing, which is woefully inadequate for what we need to occur, what we need to happen. So, and then there are, and the other thing should be acknowledged that the $100 billion financing package has tremendous strings attached to it. It's not like, here's the money and go, we're helping you because we feel responsible. It is, you will only get this money unless you do something. And so at this point, I don't see why the developing countries should stay at the table, except for the political pressure that's being leveraged by the United States as well as other rich countries to facilitate a blame game.
Well, you may be underestimating, don't you think, some of the... I feel as though I've been here at every UN negotiation like this in the last 40 years. You get to the last couple of days and you think, well, the rich countries are doing okay here. They're powerful. They're going to win. They're going to win the day. Why don't the poorer countries walk away? But they are weak. They are poorer. They're financially, economically, politically weaker. I don't mean China and Brazil and the Indians. They can fight. China owns a third of the American economy with more foreign reserves than anyone in the world. But Gabon and Uganda and Nepal. Yeah, they can walk away, but at least they may get, if they stay, even if they don't like it, they can get some aid out of it. It shouldn't be aid. We know it should be compulsory, but there's some money, there may be some help. It's a tough decision for a leader to say, well, we're not going to take anything. We're just going to walk away with the potential that all the other development assistance or advantages that they may get from, because aid and trade is used as a threat and as a bargain often.
And that's been the fundamental problem heading into these 2 weeks and before, is that we saw the rich countries, the United States, talking to Ethiopia and Bangladesh. We saw the island nations landing in Germany the head ministers landing in Germany, and Paris and France working with Ethiopia. What we saw was a deliberate splitting of the G77 and the Africa group to be able to create this deal, because as a unified bloc, G77 plus China was a very effective negotiator. Even the African bloc was a very effective on its own. And what we saw over the last 2 weeks, and even today, is a concerted effort to split up the unity and solidarity that we've seen in these countries, something we haven't seen in a while. This is kind of, watching this, it's kind of been like the rise of the Africa group in these negotiations, because they knew what they wanted, they knew what they were after, but they've been slowly but surely being picked off, which is unfortunate, because the rich countries are using their full economic, financial, political, diplomatic, and public messaging might on these countries that have barely 3 or 4 negotiators here representing their interests, whereas the United States delegation has hundreds of people here. It's just an unfair fight.
Even Brazil's got reportedly 700 or 800. Maybe that's an indication of a shift in world power away a little bit from the established powerful countries to some of the bigger and newer developing countries. Can I just throw in a question about the US, because it's US politics is a slight mystery to some of us outside. How much... You're president of Friends of the Earth, US, so you're lobbying, you've got a constituency, you're obviously watching what the government does. How much room for maneuver did Obama have, really, when he came here? What could he do in Copenhagen that wouldn't cause mayhem to his political standing, lose him votes, cause retaliation to other legislation going through the Senate or whatever? How much room for maneuver does he really have?
I think he had more room to maneuver than what he does now. I think the administration, as well as Congress, began messaging to the public about clean energy jobs and clean energy, transforming our economy. What they failed to do is message on global warming. We haven't talked to the general public, we as in the U.S. government administration, hasn't done a lot of public communications on global warming specifically. And you see that over the last few months, you've seen polls decreasing in the U.S. public about their views on global warming. And it's because we haven't talked about it. And so this is, to my mind, one of the first major global warming speeches that was specifically targeted at reducing our emissions that President Obama's given in his 8 months as a president. And so when you don't talk about it, using the bully pulpit of the presidency, you can't expect the American people, nor can you expect Congress, to do the right thing. And that has been the unfortunate nature of the political debate in the United States.
How do you think it'll be reported in the U.S., at least in the sort of major newspapers and TV and so on?
I think that newspapers and TV, the media is going to follow on the blame game line. Like I believe that the administration has been pushing this. China is doing, China's not letting this go through fairly effectively out in the press.
But on the other hand, the Premier of China spoke just before Obama, and he laid out what their country is doing. And I think it's very clear that China has taken more steps than just about any other country in the world to reduce its emissions, or at least its emissions intensity over the past couple of years. They're leading the world in wind power. The Premier talked about the reforestation efforts that they're undertaking in China, and he said, Wen Jiabao said, that we are going to do this regardless. This is not dependent on a treaty. Whereas Barack Obama came here and said, we need you guys to form a treaty, get behind us. And it's a very different message. So why isn't that coming through in the U.S. media, that China is actually taking steps on its own with or without a treaty?
I'm not going to try to play like a psychologist for the American public, but there is this nationalistic and economic tension in the United States to where there's been a lot of jobs that have been offshored, and they blame China for that. And so, it's easy for the media and the political system to use China as the boogeyman for these negotiations or for anything that's difficult to do internationally. Whether it's international competitiveness, it's always with China or against China. And unfortunately, that's where the political and public discourse is. It's easy to demonize China, and so it's easy for the media and the politicians in the United States to use that framing to kind of give excuses for not doing what they need to do.
And where do you think they go from here? Just coming back to this meeting in Copenhagen, I think they're still making their speeches, aren't they? I can't see on the monitor now, but at some point they have to stop and go back and either produce this draft or another draft, or they've got to do something. They can't just say, well, thanks for having us, we're off. I think they have to produce a piece of paper with something on it. So is that what happened? What are the possibilities of proceeding from here?
I think the 26 countries that drafted the political declaration will probably continue negotiating. They may expand those circles. It's unclear to me how it gets presented in the discussions at the plenary sessions of the COP or the COP MOP. But that's probably the course that's going to be taken. And then the question will be, how do the developing countries, particularly the Bolivias of the world and the Venezuelas of the world, how do they respond to it? And China, how do they respond to this in public? And I think we just don't know that yet.
Is all that going to happen in the next 12 hours?
That, I don't think anybody has the answer to right now.
But they're not going to. Most of these leaders are going to go home today, aren't they? They're not going to spend overnight.
I believe so. So it may be a very long day today, and to the morning tomorrow.